All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Led by Life podcast. This is a deep dive into the human experience with your hosts, Rafaela and Hannah. We're two manifestors sharing our unique journeys of self-discovery, exploration, and love, and what it means to let life lead the way. We're eager to share it with you, and so let's begin.
Welcome. So excited to be back sharing again today with you, Rafaela. It feels exciting because we're getting into the first gene key today. So what we thought we would do for anyone listening is we thought we would kind of journey through the 64 gene keys or the 64 gates in human design. And we just wanted to say, first of all, that neither of us are experts in this. We just both came across this human design system and it really spoke to us and it really resonated. And it's had such a huge impact on both of our lives that we wanted to go even deeper and to explore these different energies even more. Excuse me. So we thought that focusing on a different gene key or a different gate each week would give us a bit of a focus point for our conversations. So that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be starting with the first one today. And this is called, it's the gate of expression. Is that right? I should have looked this up before we hit record. It's the creative, the gate of self-expression in human design. And then in the gene keys, it's
I just looked it up. Well, I just looked it up and it's like the not objectivity.
Entropy.
Inspiration. No, it's inspiration.
Oh, inspiration. Okay.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure. Yes.
It's so funny. As I was speaking, I heard myself losing my voice, like my voice was crackling. And it's so funny because this is actually where my voice lies in my human design chart. So I wonder if this is bringing up a little bit of vulnerability for me because it's such a big part of who I am, this self-expression.
I mean, we're going to kind of get into it in a second. But you're going to be sharing a very honest part of you. And not to say that any of us don't have this expression, but for Hannah, it's very much like part of your nature. It's one of your gifts.
Yeah. And it connects my identity to the throat. So I almost feel like we should share, maybe when I edit this together, we can put in an image of the human design chart so people can see exactly where this lies. But yeah, it is such a big part of my identity. And then also how I express my identity, how I express myself.
Yeah. As I was just sort of like looking it up because I wanted to make sure that I had it correct. But yeah, there's a lot to do here with like inspiration. And when I was reading over the first gene key, some of the things I like really took note of at first was one, the term entropy. Like I haven't necessarily had a lot of experience with that language. So it kind of took a while for me to really get like a good grasp on how I related to that word itself. And I also noticed then that for anybody like who's into human design or the gene keys, 1 and 2, they say is like the start, and 63 and 64 are sort of like the end. And I remember sharing with Hannah, I was like, oh my goodness, you embody the beginning and I embody the end. And then as we go through it, it will just have like everything in the middle and in between. That's one of the other things that really sort of like stood out to me as I was reading it. And also that the Siddhi of Beauty is like one of the places where I felt like I've met you in that. And I'll share, a little bit about that. What I mean is, when I was getting to know Hannah, I went on her Instagram and I shared like with her that everything felt so beautiful to me. The way it was laid out, the colors, like the whole aesthetic of it all, the feeling of it, her voiceovers on videos or reels or whatever. And like, it was pretty to me. I remember telling you it was pretty. And this is sort of like what we were just kind of going over, was that it's a driving force for you. Mm-hmm. And that for Hannah, your first gate is activated by your moon. And the moon being like our emotional body, like what we need to feel good, what makes us sort of like feel alive. And I can see it. Do you feel it?
I feel it. Yeah. Yeah, it is my driving force to create and to express myself creatively. And something that came out for me when I was reading over the first Gene Key again was that it's not about being the best. It's not about being perfect. It's just, and I'm getting goosebumps as I'm talking, it's really about just expressing yourself uniquely and individually, being an individual. And I felt that my whole life. And it's also been an area of transformation for me. And it's interesting because it's also activated by my Pluto. And I'm wondering, before we get into too much, whether we should explain a little bit, because like I said, I'm not an expert at all in all the different aspects of human design and the gene keys, but I wonder whether we should just explain a little bit, like our basic understanding of the different gates and the gene keys and like the different frequencies. Do you think that would be helpful?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Anyone else who's kind of new to these concepts and ideas?
Yeah. So with the gene keys specifically, there is a spectrum of each frequency, each gate, each gift. And it's the shadow, and then the gift, and the Siddhi, like the highest expression, exalted expression of this frequency. Right.
Yeah. And from what I've learned so far, you have to kind of dive into the shadow, so the lower frequency of that energy, in order to extract the gift, so that then you can transcend the gift and express the highest possible frequency of that energy. And so it's like we can't always know what the highest expression is until we go into the lower expression. It's like understanding the polarity, the duality of life. You have to go into, so we can talk maybe about this now, like this idea of entropy. And I also haven't really had an understanding of what that word means, but I know how it feels for me when it relates to creativity and expression. But it's like you have to go into that feeling or understand that feeling of entropy in order to then extract the gift of freshness and then the highest expression of beauty in the gene keys. And then, sorry, Rafa. No, then the other thing I wanted to say just quickly was, then you have your planets that activate different, like this is how it kind of creates the human design blueprint, or the makeup is the time that you were born, where certain planets will activate different gates and gene keys in our own expression. Right.
It's sort of give it like another layer, or like an added flavor, so to speak, to that like energy frequency. And when you were sharing about entropy, I was thinking of how I remember something coming up about there's not a whole lot of like energy around this. I just remember getting this like feeling of like it's really shut down, or like it's closed off. There's not a whole lot of movement going on there. And I wonder if maybe that's where you can share with us and you can start, because I have an idea of like maybe how this has come up, because also in the shadow, there's different expressions of that. And one is, for all of them, you'll have like a repressed expression, and then you'll have a reactionary expression. Am I saying that correct? Is it
Reactive, I think. Yeah, repressed
Yeah.
and reactive.
Right.
I think,
And
yeah.
and so I was wondering, because you do sort of like embody this energy, how could you tell that you're feeling sort of the shadow of this?
Yeah, well, I've just had a quick look in my book. So the repressive nature is depressive, and the reactive nature is frenetic. And I've experienced both of those. And I've also experienced probably just the general feeling of emptiness, of entropy or emptiness, is how it kind of feels to me. Like, what's even the point? And maybe that's like the depressive nature, but I really have had these periods where I felt really creatively uninspired, and it makes me feel really low, really like, what's the point? And now having this brand new understanding, with it being in my moon, which is my driving force, and also being activated. So it's 3 times activated in my human design chart, which means it's a big part of who I am, this first gate expression and inspiration and creativity. And I think that's where this real, it's not even sadness, it's kind of like melancholy, but it is really a really depressive kind of feeling of like, I don't have a purpose here, like lacking purpose. I think that's probably the best way I can explain it, is when I don't feel inspired, I feel like I lack purpose, because I think a huge part of my purpose is to be creative inspiration. And I've now, since I've learned more about this process, I've come to understand that being uninspired is just a part of the creative process. Because, and in the Gene Keys book, he talks about how the entropy is actually like a vacuum state that then makes way for inspiration to come in, because inspiration isn't predictable. It's something that just comes when it comes. And I do feel that, I feel that doubly as someone who has this gate defined in my chart, but also as a manifestor. I feel like the way my energy works is I get these bursts of inspiration and these bursts of ideas or like guidance showing me what I'm here to create. And so, yeah, when I'm in that phase of feeling uninspired, it can be really, yeah, I just feel like empty, really. But now, like I was saying, I have this understanding that it's a part of the creative process. And so it's also exciting in a way, because it's like, well, what's coming now? There's something, it's making space for something new to come in.
And it comes out of the identity center. So when you feel like you're not being like creatively inspired or inspiring creativity in some sense, it would make so much sense as to like why you feel as if you're like lacking purpose. Because so if you look at the gene keys through the human design system, then each of the centers will sort of give like an overarching theme to that gate and that energy frequency. And so I guess what I'm wondering is, how does like you share that you feel like empty when it comes up for you, and what's been like an experience of emptiness?
So I've created a lot of different things in my life. There's always been that common theme of creativity and creative self-expression. And I can only realize now, looking back, those different patterns and those different paths that I've been on. So when I was really young, I think I was 7, I took up the trumpet, musical instrument, and I just loved it, and the reason I chose the trumpet was because it was one of the loudest instruments. I just wanted to be seen. I just wanted to be, and I also have a lot of projected energy in my chart. So a lot of how my energy works is that of a projector in human design. So a different energy type. Even though I am a manifestor, the projected energy really does play a big part of how I operate. And so I do feel this because projectors really just want to be seen and recognized. And I can see that now, looking back, that I just, even as a child, before I was really conditioned by the world, I just wanted to express myself and to be seen and to play the loudest musical instrument that there was, one of them. And there's this funny story my mum told me. I joined the school band, when I was, probably 7. And I came home from school and I was really disappointed because the trumpets had to sit at the back and I wanted to be right at the front. So it's just really funny to reflect on that. And then also, like, through school, I was always really into art. And then in my late teens, I got into nail art and I just love painting my nails. And then I started a blog when I was probably about 20. So like over a decade ago now. And I just shared my different nail designs on the blog. And then I moved to Instagram, and then it moved to YouTube. And I can't even really remember the question you asked me now, but I think what I was wanting to say is that creativity has always played a big role in my life. And there's been these periods where I've really questioned what I'm creating and whether what I'm creating has value. And that is where I found myself, probably, I don't even know exactly when it was, but it was maybe around 5 years ago. I found myself, I'd been sharing nail art for quite some time online, and I'd built up this really big audience and I loved it. But then at the same time, I felt like there's something more that I want to share. I don't want to just be boxed into just sharing about nail art. And I went through this period where I really questioned my identity. And I know it may seem silly because it's nail art, like it doesn't seem like it should be that serious, but for me, it represents something so much bigger, which is how I express myself and how I also define myself. And I guess that's where that identity center comes in. It's a big part of my identity, is these different creative expressions that come out of me. And it's something I've really, really struggled with. And I still struggle with it sometimes, is like, how is what I'm creating, how is this making sense to other people? Because there's so many different ways that I want to create. And I think that's probably been the hardest thing that I've had to, uh, that's probably been the biggest challenge, is like figuring out or overthinking what I'm creating, and feeling like, and doubting myself, feeling like this doesn't make sense, or this perhaps doesn't have purpose, feeling like I want it to, yeah, I don't know. Is
Wouldn't you
what,
say,
yeah,
wouldn't you
is this
say
making
that,
sense?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I guess what I'm wondering is, wouldn't you say that then, like, when you're in the questioning of it, when you have like this emptiness, or like there's no um sort of, let's say, creation happening, then wouldn't you say that you come to a moment where you find something that you want to like create for yourself? Because I feel like all these, and maybe it's because I have an idea of like other things you do, like
Mm.
baking, you know.
Mm.
Like I know that you love baking, um right?
Yeah, yeah, I love to
Yeah.
bake. Yeah.
And so I wonder if like it then meets this part where it's like the creations that then give you this sense of freshness is
Mm.
like a freshness for you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, what's gonna really make me feel good right now? I'm gonna bake. And if for anyone who, well, go check out Hannah's Instagram, because her baking is always so pretty. It's really, it has such beauty in it. And that's what I feels like the freshness brings to you. Like it comes in this sort of self-inspired creativity that pulls you out of the emptiness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But it sometimes doesn't feel like it comes from me, but it also comes from wherever inspiration comes from. It just comes out of the blue, and it does. And this, I just get this overwhelming feeling of excitement and inspiration and joy. It brings me a lot of joy to get these fresh new ideas. And it really does feel fresh, like a surge of energy. And maybe that's where the manifestor energy comes in, to then allow me to give me that burst of energy to create whatever it is that I'm feeling inspired to create. And it's interesting because, as you were saying that, I'm realizing as well that I have in my chart, one of my other channels is the 6447, and it has this kind of, it goes from confusion to clarity. It has this process of going from confusion to clarity, and it feels very on off. Like I go through these periods where I feel really confused, and then all of a sudden I get these epiphanies and I feel like I have a sense of clarity. And it really does it. I feel like it mirrors this kind of creative process, this on off, like feeling uninspired. And then all of a sudden the inspiration just comes out of nowhere and I feel alive again. I feel this sense of freshness. And so it's just interesting. And then also on top of that, I have the manifestor energy type, which is very on off. And then I'm also a 2/5. So I have this kind of process of like wanting to retreat as the 2, wanting to be in my own space, wanting to be in my own world. And then the 5 is the heretic, wanting to be out there, wanting to be helping people, wanting to be sharing. So a lot of my energy is kind of on off. And something that kind of came up as you were saying that is just honoring that part of myself is actually what makes way for more inspiration to come in.
Mm-hmm.
So in honoring those down periods and not resisting it and just letting it be and noticing that it's happening is then what makes way for new, fresh ideas and inspiration to come in.
How would you express or share with us like the beauty, if you've ever sort of had an experience with being in that higher expression?
Well, I don't know if that's something I can really see in myself so much. I think it's maybe something I see. I see the inspiration. I see how I inspire other people. I see how what I'm creating is beautiful and that I love beauty and I really admire beautiful things. But yeah, I don't know. It's hard to tell because I perhaps don't have that ability to like see myself in that way. But it's really nice to receive it when I have someone like you reflect that back to me, especially when we first met and you said, or the first time when you said you had a look at my Instagram and you said, oh, I can just get this sense of like who you are and your essence from what you're sharing and creating. And it's so beautiful. And that's really nice to receive because I can't always see those things for myself. And like I was saying before, I've really struggled with worrying about whether what I'm creating and sharing makes sense and having it all fit together, wanting to have it all fit together and make sense if someone comes across my page or comes across my website or whatever and sees what I'm creating. I've always thought they're just going to think it's so scattered and it doesn't come together. But having people like you and other people recently reflect that back to me, that it's like the common theme in it all is like wanting to share beautiful things. It doesn't matter what I'm sharing. And also the love that is infused into it, which is my incarnation cross. And that's also all of the gates in my incarnation cross. So my life purpose or my life theme are all in the identity center as well, which is where this first gene key is. So I feel like there's just so much centered in this love of life, love of creativity, love of beautiful things, love of being here, being human, and then expressing what that means.
Yeah. Have you heard of, I'm blanking here, his name? He's into like regenerative farming. Gosh, I'm drawing a blank. Maybe some of you will know who I'm talking about, but he describes life and food sort of being this expression of beauty. And that's also what I feel is sort of when I witness it in you, because you're somebody who like I kind of like who I know embodies this gift, is what you were just sharing about like everything sort of being infused with love and the things that you create to sort of have this beauty around it. I feel as if when I get to witness somebody doing something that like just really makes them feel so loved within themselves, it brings me to this like beauty of life. And isn't that just because there's a part, and I have to find it in the book, of like women being, well, not women, let me rephrase that, to like the feminine energy that is within the first gene key, and how like the masculine then brings, I have to find it, I'll find it as we keep going, but that like the feminism sort of carries out this action of creation. And I don't know how it all really ties in here, but I guess it's just like bringing it back to like this, the essence of the start of life. And that's one of, you know, what we were saying in the beginning of 1 and 2 sort of being like the intro, and then 63 and 64 being the outro, but it's just like a continuum of all of it. That's what I was thinking about, is how when I see things that people are just infused with the act of living, that I think it's beautiful.
It is. And that's something that I think we were talking about this recently, how sometimes we can't always see these gifts in ourselves. We need to be around other people, exchanging energy and having other people reflect these gifts back to us. But something I've realized about myself recently is just this innate ability to see the beauty in life. And also it really ties in with a lot of the work that I do around mindfulness, is just being present for just to see how beautiful it all is, just to see how magic life really is. And yeah, I don't even know how to explain it. It's like, yeah, what does that bring up for you? And I want to hear also, like, about your interpretation of all of this and your experience with these energies, as someone who's open in these areas.
Right. It's definitely not consistent. So I would say that that's, when it's not defined, it's not necessarily a consistent expression that comes through. When I was reading over and kind of understanding for myself the sort of depressive, repressed expression of the shadow, I mean, I've had plenty of times in my life where I've gone through actual states of depression. And when I look back at like what carried me through to more of a freshness, I would say is like the creation, the things that I then create for myself, like the practices I create for myself. I think that's why I've always sort of gravitated towards journaling or writing out whatever comes to me, because that's something that has like always been with me in a more depressive experience, is to just write whatever I feel. And sometimes that really helps the energy then move to this like feeling of like, okay, this is a fresh start. I will say that. So like if I had to interpret freshness, I think of it as a fresh start. I know that there's like sometimes when I feel like I'm like closed off or don't necessarily have a lot of personal direction in that moment, or feeling really like inspired to like do anything about anything, I will say that whether it's through the journaling, whether it's then through sleeping, whether it's like listening to like whatever my body needs at that moment, I usually come to them this moment where I can always recognize, like the comeback. Like usually it's after some days of not working out, not moving my body. I'll be going through whatever, but then when I come back to it, I come back to it like 10 times harder, or just so like engaged in it. And I always will say like the comeback is always sort of like this, I don't even know the expression I use, but I just always remember that the feeling of coming back to something gives me the sort of like this fresh start, and it'll happen quite often sometimes, but that's what I think of is like a lot of the times when have felt depressed, I haven't really moved a lot, or I've been in a depressive state. I haven't moved a lot, and moving then usually helps me get to this new place of feeling alive, of ready to do something. And if I had to say, like, has it ever carried me to some sense of beauty? Maybe just in the fact that that I'm just like living, that I get to like experience life and try it again. That's sort of how I see it.
Yeah, I think there's also beauty in just being human, in all of the different parts of being human. And yeah, I think if we can remember that, even when we're in these depressive states or we're in these lulls or feeling stagnant, that was kind of what came to me when you were sharing, is just this feeling of things just being stagnant and not moving forward. I think there's a lot of judgment around those different states, but like there's also beauty, I think, in it all, because, and this really goes back to these different frequencies, like we can't really understand the beauty of, or what we would call quote unquote beautiful, without understanding all of the different aspects of being human.
For a second, I was just acknowledging how, it even sort of, and I don't know if this is how like you feel it, but part of this process even feels like us starting this podcast, talking about these experiences. This in itself has sort of been like something that's been fresh, it new. The creativity was sort of like inspired between the both of us. And I would say that probably before this came about, like I didn't necessarily know what I was going to create. I've been saying for months, like I want to create, like I want to be creative. And like I didn't ever really think that it would lead to something like this. And so I'm just, as we're talking here, like I'm sort of like having this feeling of like, this is so fresh, so unfamiliar, so new, carries so much of a creative process within it. And prior to it, I mean, I had probably moments of being in more of a shadowy aspect of this frequency where nothing was really happening. It wasn't necessarily having any sort of direction towards many things, which again, like the identity center having this theme of direction. And it's interesting because I actually don't have the identity center defined. So with Hannah having the identity center defined, it sort of helps, to provide me with some inspiration of direction. And I think it's been really helpful for our process here in creating the podcast together.
Yeah, and like I've shared before, it's been really helpful for me as well with bringing down some of the inspiration and ideas, because I don't have that, while I have that consistent voice of creative self-expression, I don't have that consistent voice of sharing ideas and concepts and inspiration. And so, yeah, it's just been really beautiful to see it kind of come together like this. And yeah, I had a thought before, and I think it was really just like even just the creation of this podcast, Led by Life, and having this be something that we were led to together. It's almost like a reflection of that, just that natural process of life. There's always going to be these periods where we feel like stuck, or we feel lost, or we feel stagnant, or we feel like things aren't moving forward. But if we can just trust that process and trust ourselves, there will always be new things coming in, new opportunities, and we just need to be open to whatever's coming up. You know, we could have all these ideas about how we think our lives should go, or how we think we want things to look, but life will present us with what it wants us to create, what it wants us to share, how we can best contribute our gifts, because we all have them. We're all creative as well. I think that's something really important to share, is that even if this isn't a gate or a gene key that you have defined in your chart, you still are a creative being. We're all creative. Everyone's creative. It's just that your creativity might be coming from the inspiration, maybe coming from other people. It might not be something that you feel consistently within yourself, but life wants you to create. Life wants you to express yourself. Life wants you to express all of the different parts of you.
Well, it's funny as you said that, because I was thinking about like, how does everyone else then kind of, you know, if whether you see yourself as like a creative being, or you know, you're in the realm of like arts in some fashion, like how would they then interpret, like, I mean, even for myself, I didn't think of this this sort of quality of being a creative person. I think I've always had it sort of within me, but I never really started to think of myself expressing this way or being in this sort of energy until fairly recent. And I was thinking, like, maybe for some people their idea of like creation is how they set up their bedroom. You know, that's something that I was just thinking about. Like, it doesn't have to be these really you know, I'm going to say art. Like, it doesn't really have to be like something in art, whether it's digital art or physical art or some sort of instrument, or, you know, like, I feel like sometimes I get creative in my workouts, like in the sense that, like, you know, I think to myself, like, I'm just going to do this, and then I'm going to stack it with this, and then I'm going to go and do that. And for me, like, I'm creating my own sense of how I want to move my body. And I think that it's important to share that it doesn't necessarily always have to sort of come across in, like what I was saying, in like painting or music or writing or whatever, because at the end of the day, like, if you bring it back to the idea of the Siddhi of Beauty and how that ties in with life, isn't just the way you live your life each day. If it makes you most pleased or satisfied, isn't that just beautiful in itself?
Mm-hmm.
What if it's just the way you laid out your day that just caused such a beauty within that moment? I don't know, like bringing it down to, not to disqualify anything that we're talking about, but also bringing it down to some of the like more simple ways of just life.
It's bringing up a few different things for me. First of all, it's subjective.
Mm-hmm.
What one person finds beautiful might not be what another person finds beautiful, right? So that's where it's up to us. And it's the same with all of these different things we're talking about. It's, what does it mean to you? What does beauty mean to you? What does freshness mean to you? What is entropy or numbness or dullness? I think there are other words that he uses to describe entropy in the book. What does that mean to you? Like, we all have our own relationship with these different terms. It's all just language, and it's what's beautiful to one person won't necessarily be beautiful to another. So that was, first of all, what came up for me when you were sharing. And also, yeah, there are just so many different ways we can creatively express ourselves. And there are so many different ways that creativity can show up in our lives. And it doesn't necessarily have to relate to art. It could just be the way you set up a spreadsheet. You could have a new creative take on that. Or it could be, like you said, the way you set up your room. Or for me, I noticed it's how I plate up my meals. And like, even I do a bit of caring for my nana who's 90, and I give her dessert after her dinner, and I cut up the fruit and I present it in just this really beautiful way. I think it looks beautiful. And that's just one of the smallest ways that I express myself creatively. It's like making art out of life, right? And I think we all do it, whether or not we know we're doing it or whether or not we think it's creativity.
Right.
I think we're always creating. Humans are just naturally creative beings. Like, everything that you can look around and see in this world is something that someone has created or come up with.
Mm-hmm.
Everything we interact with.
I smile and I laugh because, I can see it in you, right? In how it is such a form of your self-expression. And like, if you were to bring it back to like your identity of like how maybe you see yourself in this physical form and this expression, because I think to myself of like how it differs for me, right? Everything that I do doesn't necessarily come out in this sense of I guess beauty, if that's what we're talking about. Like, I don't always have, that's not the way in which I would like say that I'm expressing myself. But for you, I don't know, I can really see it. Like I've said a million times now, when I, first came across you and like all the things that you had out in the world, just like, it's what's really spoke out to me the loudest. And I'm thinking like, it's kind of given me some inspiration to how I set up things in my life, or how I like output in my life, and what kind of sense does it have of beauty. Sometimes my plates look very like aesthetically pleasing for me, and other times it's a pile of mush. It's just like every food is just stacked and mixed in one another. And that's just, it's just like a little share. But yeah, it's fun to see how it sort of comes across when you embody that gate, that frequency, that energy. And I'm just excited to then see how like then the next 63 gates or expressions go, whether I have it defined, you do, or whether we both do, or neither one of us do. It's exciting.
It's exciting. Yeah. And I think it's going to be really interesting, the conversations where neither of us have it defined, and also where both of us have it defined, because I think it'll be interesting to talk about where we're open in those parts of our charts. I don't know about you, but I haven't actually explored any of the gates that I'm open in, really. I've only really gone into reading about and learning about where I have the definition, just because there's so much to do. There's so much to learn. It can be a little bit overwhelming, which is why I think we've wanted to kind of go on this journey together, is to explore all of these different things, but in a really like methodical and structured way, which we both enjoy.
Yeah.
But I think those conversations where we're both open will be really interesting. And maybe some of our listeners will share their experiences. Hopefully, that would be really nice to hear from other people as well. But I think it'll also be really interesting to talk about where we both have definition, where we have, you know, these gene keys activated in our charts, because I think it'll also be different. I think how it, like I said before, everything, we all experience these things in our own way. And so it'll be really interesting to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If anybody out there has the first gene key, the first gift, then it'd be nice to hear from you all. Can tag it, leave it down in the comments and stuff. You know, I also want to say, if anyone doesn't know and wants to explore more about the gene keys, you can go to the website, which we'll also put down. And really big thanks to Richard Rudd, who has sort of created this and put it together. So yeah.
And he has the book, the Gene Keys book. It's just called The Gene Keys, Embracing Your Higher Purpose, for anyone interested. And I really quickly, before we close this conversation off, I wanted to share a couple of things that have come up for me as well. I hope that's okay, Rafa. I feel like I have a lot of talking to do today.
I'm all for it.
So I think I'll just read from the Human Design book, which was written by Ra Uru Hu, who's the founder of Human Design. And it says, Gate 1 is the drive and deep need to focus on expressing oneself in unique and creative ways. You are not concerned with being the best, which is a comparative trait of the collective. You simply want to live out your true creative nature, your authentic individuality. When happily absorbed in doing your own thing, you are not aware that you are attracting the attention of others. It is while you are being true to your creative process that what you are doing and how you are doing it has its greatest impact. As you exemplify new ways of expressing your authentic self, you empower others to consider new perspectives or new ways of being in the world. You may even change their creative direction. Your creativity inspires others by example, and for your impact to be properly felt and appreciated, it must be seen or heard. This requires interaction with the world and waiting for an invitation. And then it goes on to talk about Gate 8, which is what makes up the channel, the 1-8, which I also have in my chart. So this channel of inspiration. I just wanted to share that because what really comes out for me is just this desire, this drive to express your authentic individuality, which is really what the gene keys, and maybe perhaps this is why it's such a powerful expression, is because it's the beginning. It's the beginning of what differentiates us, these different expressions of our authentic selves. And we're going to be going on this journey from the beginning right to the end. And the last thing I wanted to share as well is a resource that might be helpful for anyone, which has been really supportive for me. It's a book. It's probably my favorite book ever. And it's called Big Magic. And it's by Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love. That's what she's most well known for. But it's all about creativity and creative living. And she talks about this human desire to create just for the sake of creating, for it not necessarily to do anything or be anything, and just creating regardless of the outcome. And I feel like that speaks so much to what we're doing here with this conversation, with this podcast, Led by Life. It's just letting life lead us to who we're here to be, and just being ourselves because it's in our nature to do so, right?
Yeah. I'll just share this last tidbit before we leave, that I had picked up that book a few months ago, And I have a tendency to like go in and out of books, and they can be on my desk or shelf or nightstand for quite a while. And I think it's just like, when reading that book, I knew what my intentions were. I knew what I wanted to like, I wanted to hear of this. And it's really funny to me how I had been reading it, and here you are sharing with me that it's this book that has led to a lot of like your own creativity and your own creative process. And here we are like co-creating together.
Yeah.
It could be a lot of what's the word? Synchronicity of life, short of just showing up. And to me, that's beautiful. That's
Yeah.
magic.
It is. It is. It's one of the best books I've ever read. It's amazing and so supportive. And I think regardless of whether or not you have this gate defined in your chart, it's like I said, we're all creative beings, and that book just speaks so much to that. So yeah.
Yeah. We'll put in some websites where you can find your human design chart, and where you can look up more about the gene keys itself, and where you can get to know a little bit more about us. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Take care.